From the Blind Ability Studios, it's Wellness Wednesday with your hosts, Beth Gustin and Robin Ennis.
Welcome back to Wellness Wednesday. My name is Beth Gustin, licensed professional counselor, and my co-host is Robin Ennis, licensed clinical social worker. And we are here tonight to talk about a really sensitive topic that one of our listeners brought up. But before we do that, I want to thank all of our listeners who've taken the time to send in words of gratitude, any questions. We do receive all your messages, and we appreciate you giving us your feedback and posing your questions to us. And so we have a question tonight from one of our listeners. It is a very sensitive topic, so I want to just give a little bit of a content warning. We are talking about the subject of how to cope with or how to handle a situation where you are dealing with an active shooter. And so if this is an activating concept for any of you, you may want to skip this episode. We recognize it could bring up some anxiety for you. That's normal. But we do want to address this listener's question and talk about what do you do if you're in public or in school or in a workplace and there is an active shooter in the vicinity. So here's the message from our listener.
Hi, my name is Nathan. This message is for Beth and Robin. First of all, I'd like to say thank you. I love your all's podcast. It is extremely helpful. It is very helpful to me. And if you all could please talk about, this is a very unlikely situation, but what do you do if you're at school or you're in a public place and some crazy person comes in with a weapon or gun or whatever and you yourself are blind or visually impaired? How do you get to safety? What are the measures you take to keep yourself safe along with everyone else around you? Or how do you keep yourself safe to where you're not a burden to someone else in the situation, but you want to live as well as everyone else in that type of situation wants to? If you all could please answer that question in the next Wellness Wednesday podcast, that would be greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for all you do at Blind Abilities. So thanks. Have a great day. Bye.
Like Beth said, if at any point, even in the middle of our talk, if you feel uncomfortable, it's okay to step away. It was a great question that was being asked. And honestly, it brought up some things for me because being a person who was born and raised in Colorado, I was in high school during the Columbine shooting. And so hearing those questions, it brought me back to that exact moment because as a teenager, I had to think myself, okay, and I was sighted then, but I had to think myself, okay, what would I do if something like that happens? And unfortunately, nobody should have to be put in that position to think that way. And so years later, as an adult, with a visual impairment, being completely blind, I do find myself thinking that same question that I was asking myself as a teenager, especially now with the increased violence occurring in our society. And there have been instances, I've been in 2 workplaces where we have discussed different drills on what to do if there's a fire, what to do if your safety was being threatened and there was an active shooter. And me personally, and Beth and I can go down, I believe Beth had the same training as I did, even though we worked at different agencies, and we can discuss those steps later. But from my personal standpoint is that sure, we can go down these different trainings and what you would do, but it looked different for me compared to my sighted coworkers. I feel like in both agencies, I was the only person who was completely blind. And so the safety protocol looked a little different for me. In one agency, I think in both, there was no protocol. And so it was, okay, well, how does this impact me and what can I do? And that's very, very scary. Did you ever feel like that, Beth? Have you ever been the only, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yes. So when I was in college is when Columbine happened. So I'm a little bit older than you, Robin, not by much, but a little bit. But it's made me think about what would I do? And I worked in 2 agencies where we had drills. We had the run, hide, fight protocol. But I was the only blind person in both agencies, and I have a guide dog. And I think this looks a little bit different if you have a guide dog versus a cane versus you don't need a mobility aid. There's 3 different distinct challenges there, I think. And so when I went through my drills at the 2 places I worked at, we practiced the hide part of the run, hide, fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so it often made me think about, as a totally blind person, blind from birth, what would I do? What if I was at the local grocery store and this happened? What would I do? And so I really appreciate this question being brought up. We don't have all the answers. I'll tell you that right now. We don't have all the answers. I think it really depends on your unique situation, your mobility skills, your comfort level. A lot of factors I think will come into play here. But the one thing I would say is when I go into any location, store, airport, friend's house, whatever, I'm always looking for where's the nearest exit. In movie theaters, I do this too. I make sure I know where the nearest exit is. I make sure I can retrace my steps back to the exit that I came in. I make sure I know what's around me. Is there something I can get under? Is there something I can barricade the door with? Things like that, so that I feel that I can be as safe as possible if I'm hiding.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I took karate, about 8 or so years ago, but that is one thing that my sensei told me is to always make sure you know where the exit is. And even now, sitting in movie theaters, they tell you locate the nearest exit. And again, unfortunately, we have to think that way, but it is important to know your surroundings, sighted or blind, being familiar on where you can quickly leave if needed. And Beth, you mentioned the hide part. And so in the second, actually both agencies that I worked for, both protocols actually in both agencies involved me being left behind per se. So because it could be a liability if any of my coworkers tried to help me when they were trying to get out, that they were told just to leave me behind. And that's very unsettling, especially because I feel like in the midst of chaos, everybody's running, and sound, I rely on sound because I don't have my eyesight. And so if people are in panic and there's talking, one of my key senses, there's another barrier added to it. And so that makes it a little more difficult. So anyway, so that made me a little unsettled knowing that the safety protocol would be that I would have to kind of fend for myself. So the hide piece would come into play very much. And so I remember trying to figure out, okay, where could I hide, so that nobody could find me, where would be the place where somebody would be less likely to look at. And nobody should have to think that way. And I remember, crawling up under my desk, trying to look to see if I could fit in between a file cabinet and a different barrier, things like that. I think that wherever you are, like work or home or grocery store, know your resources. What can you use on you, or what can you use near you to protect yourself, whether it be hide or if you have to fight and defend yourself, how can you be able to use things readily available to protect yourself in that way?
There's also a really good book that was written a number of years ago called Safe Without Sight. And I have not read that book in years, and so I can't remember 100% like all the different things it covers, but it was really good on just basic how to stay safe without sight. And if you can take any self-defense, not to hurt anybody, but just so you can defend yourself, take some self-defense classes. Have some just basic self-defense skills. And I don't know, I can't say what I would do if I had to run, but I think what I would do is try to grab onto the nearest person I could and run with them, which may or may not be the safest thing to do, but I want to get out of that building and out of that environment if I can.
Right.
And so I think I would be like, latch on to the nearest person, say, I'm running with you. That's how it's going to be. Now I think about if you have a guide dog, because I'm a guide dog user and I have to also protect that dog when we're hiding. That is something I could not fit under my desk at both places I worked. It didn't work. And so I never had a good solution. I laid on the floor and put my guide dog under the desk and kind of locked him under the desk, because in my mind, I needed to keep him safe to ultimately keep me safe. Because if I had to get out of the building, I needed to make sure that he could do that.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a guide dog. I have a cane. My dog, she's very stubborn. She's a French bulldog, so definitely not a guide dog material. But when you were talking about one thing, and I don't know if he mentions any strategies in the book, but do you remember the 9/11 survivor?
Yes. Michael Hinkston?
Oh, yep. He wrote a book about how him and his guide dog got through the tower. It's definitely possible. So try not to be overwhelmed or feeling like that the odds are completely against you and keeping yourself safe, because it's not. It just takes more creativity on your part of it. And like Beth mentioned, utilizing your resources, even, it may not be the safest thing, but you want to try and get out of there. So grab onto somebody if that's what you need to do in that moment. Follow your instinct and follow your gut feeling.
Planning ahead, like I said, I make sure to know the exit and take the time to do those things when you're out somewhere. And if you go to the same places often, you'll learn it. And so you won't have to think as hard about, oh my gosh, how do I get out of here? It's more just like, go. because you'll know it. Your brain will remember even in chaos if you've done something enough times.
Mm-hmm.
I know you may end up doing the flight, fight, freeze thing, but if you've been somewhere enough and you know you need to get out, you can get out.
Yep, I agree. And another thing too is if you work in person, check with your organization and see what plan they have in action. I know that in the second agency that I worked at, I made sure that the head of security knew who I was and I knew their name, so that if something were to occur, I knew who to reach out to and they knew what my name was and where my cubicle was. So that can be reassuring too.
I did the same thing. I made sure front desk knew who I was. You just make friends with everybody you can in the workplace, especially security guards, especially front desk staff that are going to be kind of the front eyes and ears of the agency. Make friends with whoever you can and talk to HR, talk to your boss, talk to the people that you need to talk to say, okay, this is our agency's protocol. Can we talk through how it might look for me?
Yep. And also too, an important tool that a lot of people have readily available and carry with them is their phone. I know that's a great safety tool to utilize, whether it's to call 911 or call whoever it may be for support.
I will say in my training for Run, Hide, Fight, we were taught to, when we're hiding, turn your lights off, close your blinds, lock your door, and turn your cell phone off because the light could show under the door and tell the shooter that there's someone in that room.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So that's something to think about. But if you can call 911,
Yeah.
that would also be obviously critical to do that.
Right. That's a good point. I know for blind individuals, you can turn on the screen curtain, which dims the light a little bit. And then if you use a screen reader, you would probably have to lower the volume so that it won't create more attention to you through the sound. And that's a good point.
So I think I want to stop here for a second and just have everyone take a collective deep breath because this is a very sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how everyone's feeling listening to this, but I just want to acknowledge if your anxiety's up a little bit, if your heart's racing, it's okay. It's normal. And just again, thank the person who brought up this topic because it is really important that we talk about tough things like this.
Right.
And not only how to handle them, but the anxiety it might bring up or the out and out fear that it can bring up. I in no way want anyone to never leave their house because of that fear, because there are things you can do to keep yourself safe.
Right. You maybe not be able to control the situation or circumstance, but you can control how you react to it. Yeah, definitely try not to shut yourself off from the world because of that fear. I'm glad you mentioned about taking a break and checking in with yourself, Beth. One grounding technique that I like is, so while you're maybe trying to calm yourself down, pay attention to the ground beneath you. What does that ground feel like? Or, if you're sitting on a chair, noticing the texture, kind of ground you and bring you back to the present versus worrying about something that hasn't happened yet.
I also like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, although I just do 5, 4, 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you have sight, 5 things you can see, you can modify this and just do 4, which is 4 things you can touch. But if you do 5 things you can see, name them in your head or out loud. 4 things you can touch, actually touch them. 3 things that you can hear. And if you're really good, you can do 2 things you can smell. I have allergies. I usually can't smell a lot. And 1 thing you can taste. I like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 because it goes through all 5 of your senses, or however many senses you have, and you can get creative with that one. But it can really help ground you and keep your brain focused on the present moment, which keeps you more aware, more alert, and more grounded.
Yep, that is definitely a popular one. I like that one. Well, Beth, do you have anything else to add with this topic?
I do not. I will say I did some research on this, or I guess I do have something else to say. I did some research on this one just to kind of see what else was out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not alone. This is a tricky subject. There weren't a lot of super helpful tips and tricks that we hadn't already talked about as we talked through this and kind of thought about the person's message. So just to verify, it's out there. This question is very common.
Mm-hmm.
And every situation is going to be different and unique to you.
Yeah, no, it is. It is common. This is more so in terms of children, but there's a organization called Safe and Sound. Instead of using the run, hide, and fight scenario, they use access, act, and audit. they use that to try and keep children with disabilities safe within schools, especially because within the past incidents of school shootings, some of the victims were those of disabilities. And so, like you mentioned, Beth, some people don't feel comfortable or they can't run. And so the Safe and Sound nonprofit takes that into consideration, people of all abilities. So maybe you could even adapt that as an adult in the workplace. So if you Google Safe and Sound nonprofit, and you can take some ideas from that too.
It's a great resource. Thank you.
Again, we always appreciate you all reaching out to us and providing us with such thought-provoking questions and comments. And so keep them coming. We enjoy hearing from you and hearing your perspective and what's going on out there. Until next time, take care.
Take care, and thank you for listening.
You can send Beth and Robin a message at 612-367-6093 or by email at info@blindabilities.com. They'd love to hear from you.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the realities
of blind abilities.